Hello friends, hope everyone is doing well today. Please bear with us, this is a new experience and we're going to give you the best that we can. We have some exciting guests to speak with us today and share a whole lot of good information. My name is Scott Ryan, I'm with the Hendersonville Police Department. I am the commander for the Investigative Services Bureau. And I have a couple of guests with me today, and we're going to talk about opioid addiction. It's a very serious topic. It's a lot of times can be a very embarrassing topic, but it's one that we need to address and put out on the table because there are a lot of people that are hurting and lost out there. And if we know them, or we may be one of them, maybe we can find some answers together today. So I'm going to ask our guests to introduce themselves. Brandy?
Yes, my name is Brandy Harder. I am a regional outreach coordinator with Cumberland Heights Foundation in Nashville, Tennessee. We are a drug and alcohol treatment facility. And in my current role, my focus is to connect communities, organizations, and families with resources for treatment.
Hello, I'm Will Taylor, Lifeline Coordinator and Regional Overdose Prevention Specialist, contracted through the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services.
Thank you, Brandy and Will. And we'll get right to business because we've got a lot to talk about today. What are opioids? Opioids are a type of drug either derived from or chemically similar to compounds found in opium poppies, which are a flowering plant. Most people think of heroin when we talk about opioids, and that's certainly correct. What you may not consider are that there are many other opioids that are prescription painkillers, such as oxycodone, hydrocodone, morphine, codeine, and fentanyl. And we'll talk a little more about fentanyl later. Sometimes we have a belief that because a doctor prescribes us a medication that we can't develop a problem with that, and that is absolutely false. Many times a medical necessity that puts you on a pain-killing medication can morph into a full-blown addiction where you become dependent upon a substance. Just because a doctor says that you need to take that does not mean you can't become addicted to it. I'm going to be very brief with how opioids work because I was a horrible chemistry student and not much better in biology. So here's a brief explanation. Opioids bond to receptors in the body and brain which help to block pain. In addition, they cause a huge release of dopamine, which is pleasurable to the user and causes the user to prioritize the drug as if it were a number one priority for basic survival. Opioid users quickly build a tolerance and a physical dependence that may lead to addiction and even overdose. One of the best explanations I've seen for addiction is in the YouTube series by Dr. Kevin McCauley, Pleasure Unwoven. This is a series of 8 short videos that provide an easy-to-understand explanation. And I'll have to thank Brandy for providing me the link to that. After 26 years in law enforcement, simply sitting down and watching a few minutes of these videos has completely changed my perspective and understanding of addiction, particularly opioid addiction. So thank you for that, Brandy. And if you can, Brandy, would you please describe from your perspective what is addiction?
Sure. So you kind of touched on it some in your explanation of how opioids work in the brain. In its simplest definition, addiction is continued use despite consequences. So most of the time, someone's addiction starts as substance abuse. And so for some people, when they continue to abuse substances, their brain does change. And when those brain changes happen, it makes it almost impossible for an addicted person to stop using on their own without medical or clinical interventions. which is why it is defined as a disease.
Thank you, Brandy. Will, would you mind describing your situation and what addiction feels like?
Yes, so to kind of set the stage, first and foremost, I am an individual in long-term recovery. What that means to me is I've been absent from mind-altering substances now for a little over 7 years. After spending 20 years in addiction, really experiencing straight firsthand what that was like, and now having a life in recovery, looking back at that life in addiction, the first thing that I think is important that we understand is that there's different stages. It starts off with the use, abuse, dependency, and then the full-blown addiction. Majority of individuals do not start out. I know for me, I didn't start out just everyday user. I was introduced to alcohol at age 11. I am the youngest of 4 with 3 older sisters, a single mom raising us all. So what did my life look like? My life looked like, a mom having to work 2 jobs, sometimes 3, relying on my older sisters for my upkeeping. So therefore, how I was introduced to alcohol. My oldest sister is 9 years older than I was. So there, here I am, the annoying little brother there, and she's wanting to have some friends over, of course, partake into alcohol, so they thought it would be a fun idea to give that to me. I become the entertainment of the party, and then the next thing you know, I kind of fell asleep, passed out, as you would say. But I remember waking up the next day and having this sense of connection. And it wasn't the connection to the substance. It was actually the connection of feeling like I belonged to something, a group of peers that were so much older than I was. So I took that feeling and I kind of just ran with it on through my life, which of course one substance led to another and to another. I remember the first time I actually tried the use of opioids. By this time I was 16, and one of my friends had gotten some from his parents out of the medicine cabinet, and I thought, well, why not, I remember taking the opioid at that time and really liking the feeling. It kind of gave me a sense of energy, kind of made me feel like I was somewhat untouchable, but it also still gave me the sense of belonging to something. Of course, through my journey in active addiction, it was just in a matter of time that, the opioids, the lower tabs was just not enough, so it led to something stronger, to eventually I was an IV heroin user. After using IV heroin for so long, I become to get to a state of addiction to where I wanted to quit, but I just couldn't. The use, the physiological withdrawal symptoms of going without an opioid for a couple days was just unbearable, to where I was really just using, in a sense, to keep from being sick. I know a lot of times we maybe view addiction as individuals that are choosing to use. But when the cycle of addiction grows upon someone, there's things that are taking place physiological that just aren't as simple as putting those down.
Thank you, Will. Some national statistics to share with you that I found interesting. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention report that overall opioid-involved death rates decreased by 2% from 2017 to 2018. However, synthetic opioid-involved death rates, excluding methadone, increased by 10%. That's a huge increase within that category that overall went down by 2%. Locally, we attributed this to the presence of fentanyl as an additive to heroin and other drugs such as meth. But we have also seen this substance added in what most people consider a minor drug such as marijuana. And with that, we know locally that we are having increased overdoses due to fentanyl and opioid abuse because people are buying these things illicitly. They don't know what they're getting whenever they make a purchase. You're getting a bag of powder. Who knows what's in that powder? You're getting a bag of weed. Who knows what could be sprinkled on that weed? So you really don't know what you're ingesting when you're buying illegal drugs. The Department of Health and Human Services report that in 2018, an estimated 10.3 million people aged 12 or older misused opioids in the past year. That is an absurd number to me. Specifically, 9.9 million people misused prescription pain relievers, and 808,000 people used heroin. That's a lot of abuse going on right there. Health and Human Services also report that since 1999, more than 760,000 people have died from a drug overdose. 2 out of 3 drug overdose deaths in 2018 involved an opioid. Will, you talked a little bit about it, but if you could kind of go back over how you were first introduced to opioids and how that progressed.
So I was first introduced by opioids by a friend getting some Lortab, 10 milligrams from his mother's medicine cabinet. He brought those to a little get-together we were having, and we just kind of, we shared them, partaked in them. And I remember that feeling of having an opioid compared to different substances that I had experienced in the past. One thing about it that the opioids did for me that any other substance hasn't is it gave me the sense of still belonging to something, but then it also gave me kind of a boost of energy. I felt like I had clarity. So of course, I continued using opioids. I continued that for probably another 10 years to where the opioid dependency just led to building tolerance, and then I needed more of that substance just to achieve that same effect. An opioid high really is a euphoric high. I remember looking back on some of the days in active addiction and experimenting with some of the more potent narcotics or more potent opioids. I know we hear a lot of conversations on overdose. Well, I remember when I was in active addiction, if we heard of an overdose, we would really go after or try to find the dealer who sold that bag, just because, in a sense, the way my mind was working at the time is he had the good stuff. Not really taking into consideration of somebody lost their life because of that opioid overdose, but really we just viewed it as he had the purest product out there, and that was something that, at the time I was after. The euphoric feeling and euphoric rush, is honestly undescribable. I've tried to really put that in words and times, but it's, trying to just really label it is hard to do. It's sad to say the reality of it or what it looks like physically is kind of borderline being conscious and unconscious. It's also referred to as the nods. I remember, family members coming to me thinking that I was passed out, but honestly I was kind of just in that euphoria of being conscious and unconscious, just kind of in and out of it. But that was where I found personally that the euphoria had peaked for me.
Thank you, Will. And let me also direct to you, in my experience in law enforcement, I have encountered people typically due to behaviors when they are trying to get resources for the drug. They're out of money, so they have to go and hustle in some way to be able to score the next hit And I've had these folks describe to me that, you know, it's the drug craving that drives them to continue this cycle, you know, hustle, score, and shoot is how it's been referred to me before. Is there any words that you can give that would describe that craving that you have as an addict when you don't actually have the drugs, but you're craving for the drugs? I've read that it's not like you have a craving for chocolate, you know, after you have a meal or something. But I think that's how we understand cravings. Can you help us to understand that aspect of craving?
Yeah, so, and when we look at the disease complex and the disease of addiction as a whole, like I said, we know that there's different stages, the use, abuse, dependency, and neglect. But through that, and we start building tolerance. As I mentioned earlier, tolerance just means that I have to use more to achieve that same effect. But also with that tolerance, I'm building a higher dose of dependency. With that dependency comes the craving aspect of that. Now, what makes the opioids, kind of so profound in our psychological aspect of our mind is getting that euphoric release of that dopamine, that pleasure chemical in our brain. So when we use opioids, we're getting that full rush of dopamines, which from there triggers the euphoria. But the more we continue using, we're also creating a higher level of craving. That level of craving has been compared to 10 times the level of food craving. So if I was hungry, yeah, my stomach may growl a little bit, and I would go and feed myself and kind of suffice that. Well, you're looking at a craving that's 10 times stronger than that. So an individual that is, exhausted all resources of money, is really not working in things like that just due to his dependency on opioids, therefore gets involved in a lot of criminal behavior and activity just to keep feeding his addiction because of that craving is on the individual. That craving, in a sense, is just a full-blown like flu symptoms to where his body is actually starts controlling his mind, telling him that he wants it and he has to have it. Unfortunately, we see a lot of negative publicity out there. Individuals overdose with their kids in their cars, and how could that thing, incidences like that occur? Well, for one, we know that science has told us that over continued use, the frontal part of the brain, the frontal lobe, which is primary functions are insight, judgment, and rationalization, become detached or so-called offline. So an individual that's experimenting, that's already past the dependency part of addiction, what actually happens is they're not having any kind of insight, judgment, or rationalization. They're not having rational thoughts. And the only thing that is profound in their mind is to feeding their addiction, whatever that means. And when an individual is in depth of that addiction, they're going to go to any means necessary to make sure that they get the next fix.
That's a great explanation. Thank you, Will.
Yep.
Brandy, are you seeing any specific trends for how people end up addicted to opioids or any common denominators? And also, if you could describe how addiction is treated.
Sure. Regarding trends with opiate addiction, you would be surprised how many people start their opiate use with a legal prescription for opiates. It happens all the time. And eventually that prescription runs out, or there's no longer a medical justification to continue to prescribe that medication, and so they turn to, maybe getting pills from friends or family, or, when there was a kind of a huge lockdown from a legislative standpoint on who could get prescriptions, how many prescriptions you could get, it made heroin cheaper. So, and more sought after. So And then, of course, you mentioned fentanyl. So we don't know what we're getting, and fentanyl is often added to heroin. And then, of course, like Will described, there's other people that started using one substance and graduated to stronger and stronger substances. Regardless of what kind of addiction it is, the treatment can be the same. The first thing that needs to happen is that individual needs to have an assessment to determine what level of care they need. They may need a medically supervised detox to help them safely discontinue use of the substance that they're on. And then it may look like residential treatment or intensive outpatient treatment or a combination of those things. And then also, they'll need to follow up with continued care, such as ongoing therapy and involvement in 12-step or other support groups, or even medication management and sometimes medication-assisted therapy.
Super, and we'll get more specific with what's
Sure.
available as we have time. Just some local statistics for you here in Hendersonville. Just overdose reports alone, in 2018 we had 40. In 2019 we had 35. Year to date, we're 9 months in, we have 47 overdose reports already this year with 3 months to go. So we're blowing the previous years out of the water. You can tell how we're expending a lot of resources due to the issue of overdose. The vast majority of overdoses that we're seeing are opioid-based. Now let's talk about deaths. Putting a concrete number to deaths for statistics as recent as today is very difficult, so we're going to use suspected overdose deaths. In 2018, we suspect that there were 8 overdose deaths in Hendersonville. In 2019, we suspect there are 9. Year to date, we have 12, still with 3 months to go for this year. And we attribute this to what we described earlier as fentanyl. We're seeing people that are ingesting substances that have no idea what they're ingesting, and just because they successfully used this drug yesterday, maybe they had to go back and buy more and they use again today, it's got an additional substance in there that can't be seen, can't be smelled, it's not detectable, and the FDA is not regulating the sale of heroin on the streets. You have no idea what you're ingesting. So the breakdown of this, females, 3 of those persons year to date that we suspect have passed due to drug overdose are female. The ages range from 31 to 42, with the average being age 36. The remaining were males aged 28 to 50, the average being 41.4 years of age. I didn't have to figure this up to know where these averages would fall. In the course of my job, I speak to many groups over the course of time, and in reference to addictions and opioids in particular, I am always cornered on the back end of these community meetings. Everyone has a situation that they want to run by me. 99% of those situations are an older couple that are dealing with a child. In this case, the child is an adult, 35 to 40 years old, that has developed an addiction, typically to opioids. And the question remains the same from each of them. What are we supposed to do? How do we handle our adult child's addiction without enabling? And that's the key. You have to support someone without enabling. Now, figuring out how to do that, as soon as somebody figures that out, they're going to be a very wealthy person. But we have 2 experts here that can help us along. Brandy, from the clinical perspective, what advice would you give these parents?
So the most important thing that I think that any loved one can do is stop and make sure that they are taking care of themselves first. It is probably the most important thing that they can do. That may look like getting a therapist themselves, going to their own support groups such as Al-Anon. It's really hard to take care of a person that's in active addiction if you're not taking care of yourself. So if they have a loved one that's struggling and they really want to find a way to get them help, I always recommend, I get the same question. I have parents call me all the time, and the first thing I say is, have you heard of Al-Anon? And I want them to get to a meeting. I want them to have support. And then after that, it's really good for family to get disease education as well, so that they understand how these substances are affecting the brain of their loved one. It makes a huge difference in helping them to understand what their loved one is going through. And then when it's time to offer help or confront their loved one, it's really important to always say what you see and how you feel, and then offer ways that they can get some help. So what that might look like, Scott, is, hey, listen, I noticed you've been missing a lot of work. You're not coming to family functions as often. You seem to need more medicine than you used to, and I'm really worried about your health, and I'm really worried about you, and I miss spending quality time with you. I've looked into some places that can help you with this. Are you willing to get some help? That conversation is not always immediately effective, but most of the time it does lead to that person getting help eventually. Maybe they're not ready right then, but when they are ready, when they're fed up, they'll know that you were a safe person, that you know that they need help, and that they can go back to you and say, you know what, I think I'll take you up on that. And then it's also super important for parents, especially that are concerned that they may be enabling an adult child, that they start setting some healthy boundaries. They have a right to safety and security in their home, and they should be taking steps to, make sure that they're taking care of that. So sometimes that looks like removing the person using from the home, or maybe guarding your bank account, not giving them access to your funds or your couch or whatever it may be. But ultimately, everyone has a right to safety and security, and that you shouldn't compromise that for someone that's active in their use.
That's great advice. But that sounds like a long process. So, Will, let me pitch this to you. We're an impatient society. We like to fix things right here, right now. Is there something or anything that can be said or done by these parents to either mitigate the issues or help their adult child along to recovery? What's the magic phrase that does it all?
Well, Scott, I believe you said it. Whoever finds that answer will definitely be a wealthy person. When I work with families, I always tell them that addiction is not a spectator sport. Sooner or later, everyone gets to participate. And what I truly mean by that is, Brandy said that the family members have to take care for themselves first, and that is crucial, because what happens is the love for the individual, their family member, or loved ones will kind of blind them from the true results of their behavior. So they kind of pick up the denial. I know personal experience, my mom's 40 plus years in the medical field. I would come home with abscess and things on my arm, but just tell her, I got stung by a wasp. And the love for her son, she believed that. And it wasn't until she truly reached out and got educated about the addiction and the disease concepts that she really started holding me accountable. Accountability is firm, especially if an individual is residing at the home. Brandy mentioned just the option of seeking safety at the house, accountability, setting those ground rules and, holding to those. I know at first I was manipulated and I was lying and stealing, and then come that accountability, things become a little bit more challenging for me to get away with things. We spoke earlier about needing the means to find our drug of choice, the opioids and things, and with that accountability, it kind of makes it, in a sense, tougher to achieve that. I always say that the term tough love sounds harsh, and it can be, but there's also a real thing is loving someone to death too, just by that enabling and things. So standing strong, be prepared with resources. So when you do kind of have a conversation, intervention, that you have somewhere to offer that help and let them know that you will support them in the recovery journey, but not in their active use.
That's awesome. Brandy?
Yes, Will is spot on there. And I just wanted to mention too so addiction as a disease is still, it's a very counterintuitive disease as opposed to other illnesses. So if we have a loved one suffering from cancer, we want to take care of them. We want to feed them. We want to clothe them. We want to help them take care of expenses when they are unable to. And, addiction's kind of counterintuitive, and sometimes those very things that we think are helping are actually harming. If we're paying for their food and housing and gas, then that's more money that they can use on substances. So, and just getting into a support group and finding a good therapist, like that can really help someone figure out the difference between helping and enabling. Because when you're in the thick of it, everyone's suffering. It's a family disease, and it's really hard to practice that discernment. Am I helping or am I enabling? So, having a therapist is really key for that.
That's awesome. Let me pitch it right back at you with a tough one here. Just how successful are recovery programs?
So I think that goes back to if there is an answer for that, someone's going to get rich. But I mean, it's all in what you put into it. That being said, statistically speaking, the longer that someone is engaged in treatment, then the better their chances are at long-term recovery. So you can't just go to rehab and you're fixed. You need to follow up with outpatient care. You might need trauma therapy. You might need family counseling. It's amazing how much of an influence the family's own recovery plays in the patient's success. So if a patient goes to treatment and then returns to the same dysfunctional family system and nobody else in the family has gotten well, then they're highly likely to relapse. So another thing that I think is really important about the family seeking their own help is that you are taking responsibility for your own suffering and your own healing. And so by doing so, you're not asking your loved one suffering from addiction to do anything that you aren't willing to do as well, and you're giving them permission to do the same.
It sounds like this is certainly a team effort.
It is.
Has to be a team effort.
Yes.
Without support, you're just kind of on an island, is what it sounds like. But let me go over real quick just some signs of addiction and maybe what some of the withdrawal symptoms look like. Signs of addiction: mixing with different groups of people or changing friends, spending time alone, avoidance. I think we've heard isolation up here. Losing interest in activities that once were the highlight of your day. Change in sanitation, because your focus is on surviving with another hit of the drug. A lot of times personal hygiene falls to the wayside. You can be very tired or very sad. You can eat more or less than usual. Overly energetic, talking fast, not making a lot of sense, nervous or cranky, quickly changing moods, sleeping at odd hours, missing important appointments. We see that one a lot. Legal troubles, attending work or school on a very erratic schedule. You know, if you're supposed to be there Monday to Friday and you make it 2 out of those 5 days, that might be a clue. And financial hardship, which results from all of your resources going into your need for the drug. Some of the withdrawal symptoms that we see are drug cravings, and again, that's not like the craving for chocolate. I think Will said it best, that they're described as 10 times our craving for food when we're hungry. Anxiety, irritability, insomnia, vomiting, diarrhea, tremors. Those are just some of the things that you can look for. Along with drug use comes paraphernalia. It usually takes something to get that stuff into your system, and they leave little telltale signs. Some of the paraphernalia may include pill grinders, pieces of cotton or torn cigarette filters, bent spoons or burnt spoons, syringes, small pieces of foil, similar to like the old flat sticks of chewing gum, torn corner baggies or very small Ziplocs or vials that have little twist-off caps, rubber piping or distorted leather or vinyl belts. They're distorted from the misuse. You know, a belt is meant to go around the waist, not the arm, so typically you're going to see some creases in places where they don't belong. Those are just some of the things that you can look for as additional indicators. So let me pitch a question to both of you, and we'll start with you, Will. When family or friends notice any of the red flags that go along with this addiction or any of these indicators, what should be their very first action?
You know, I would suggest engaging in conversation about it. You know, a lot of times I know my mom tend to blow things off, push them to the side when ultimately they should have been brought to the surface right away. And that's just a way of displaying that accountability. You know, I know early on in recovery I necessarily did not like the accountability. But I give my first year of sobriety to just that, the accountability. You know, people being involved in so-called my business. You know, I firmly believe that the opposite of addiction is not just that sobriety. Yes, sobriety is crucial with that, but really just the opposite of addiction is connection. We know that isolation, as you mentioned, is a sign of kind of you know, some use and abuse and some underlying issues, but the more engagement we can have with the individual, you know, sometimes it may be some tough situations, tough conversations to have, but that's what has to happen to really be involved and get ahead of addiction itself.
Thank you. And Brandy?
Yeah, so I agree with everything Will said, and as a matter of fact, just to say that phrase one more time, the opposite of addiction is connection. The more connected we are, the harder it is to keep using. So if you have a loved one and you're seeing these very evident signs that they are clearly using opiates, you know, they're finding some of these things. I mean, I think the first thing you need to do is talk to someone. As Will explained, his mom would kind of blow off, you know, what she found or signs that she saw, just because maybe she didn't want to believe that, you know, her love for her son. You know, nobody wants to believe, you know, that they're seeing what they're seeing all the time, you know. So that's her own denial. So if you talk about it, though, it makes it real. So, and sometimes, again, when you're inside of the situation, it's hard to discern. So when you talk to someone else, just having some perspective outside of that family bubble helps you to see things for what they are. Also, another reason to talk about it with someone, secrets keep us sick. And the sooner those secrets come out, the sooner that person is going to get help.
That's awesome. I want to say that one more time. Secrets keep us sick. Thank you for that. both of you have, being involved in this world, both of you have, I'm sure, a huge list of resources. But let's go ahead and start with you, Brandy. What resources are available for persons with addictions or for families trying to help a member with addiction?
There are a ton of resources out there. Fortunately, as science has progressed, compared to 20 years ago, there's probably triple the amount of treatment centers that there were. So there are lots of treatment centers out there. There's help available. There are treatment centers that take insurance or have state funding. So in my job in particular, I'm looking to find placement for anyone that calls me, anyone that I come across. And sometimes that's not with us, sometimes that's somewhere else, but there's definitely help out there if someone wants help.
And again, you're with?
Cumberland Heights.
Awesome. And Will, what can you add to that?
So as Brandy mentioned, yes, there are several resources out there. I will say probably the most important piece of information I hope you take today is that, and I hear this so much, that, there's not enough resources, there's not enough resources. Well, actually the resources are there, we just tend not to go looking for them until we're in that need of crisis. So just going ahead and being prepared, being a step ahead. As affiliation through the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse, we have the Tennessee Red Line that is 24/7 crisis line. Individuals can actually call or text 1-800-889-9789. They remain anonymous, and they'll speak to an individual or receive a text from the individual that will help navigate them and direct them to resources, and that's insured or not. Even family members can call in on that number just to receive some services. So.
That's awesome. We could continue talking about this for hours, but we're not. I know everybody's probably ready to get back to life by now. I would like to especially thank Will and Brandy for sharing their time with us today. And I'm sure if we receive some follow-up questions, I can reach back out to whoever may have those questions and provide the information needed or resources necessary to accomplish whatever might fit your needs the best. Thank you again for your time. I hope you're able to find some value in what we've laid out here today. And again, my name is Scott Ryan with the Hendersonville Police Department, and you can reach me at 615-264-5303. And I'll do my very best to get you pointed in the right direction for whatever your needs may be. Thank you.